I'm going to take a little bit of time before we get into the Word and just talk with you about some of what's going on and how we respond to this. You allow me, those of you here locally and those of you who tune in on a regular basis, you allow me the opportunity, the privilege to speak into your lives on a regular basis, and I am truly humbled by that fact. And it would be foolish to me in a season like this to fail to speak to the biggest issue that's before us right now and to sort of act like that's not going on. So we're going to camp here for just a few minutes. Most of you, probably just about everyone, knows that we will not continue to meet in any type of gatherings at all for the next few weeks. We're not sure how long that's going to be, and I want to be clear about that. We're not doing that out of fear. I can say this honestly. I've never had a moment in any of what's going on that I have felt a shred of fear about what's happening. We're doing what we're doing because we feel like it is the wisest course to ensure maximum safety for people. And I don't feel like that we're overreacting to do this. And nothing that I'm about to say is an attempt to defend that. It is just to speak into the situation that we're now facing. I know that we as a congregation, both locally and the web community that we have, are probably, I know we are, we're all over the page in terms of our opinions about what's going on and how serious this is and how we should respond to this. And unfortunately, we're in a situation that has been politicized. People are using this to try and make others look bad or try and make themselves look good. And so in an attempt to do that, they'll either heighten or diminish the seriousness of what's going on. And I don't have any interest in doing any of the above, but I would like to speak into the situation. One, to just try and make sure we are on the same page about what's happening and to consider what an appropriate response for us as the family of faith should be. So I hope the things I'm about to share with you don't make you mad, but it really doesn't matter because I'm going to share them anyway because I love you and this stuff matters.
Go ahead.
Thank you. There's good news and there's bad news. So let's approach it that way. There is good news. With all of the bad news that's out there, there are some things that we can say that are positive. On the positive side, speaking for those of us who are local, there is a good chance that you don't have COVID-19 right now. That's good news. That's good news. There's a decent chance that you haven't even been exposed to it yet. That's good news. If you have been or you become exposed, if you do contract this disease, there is a slightly better than 90% chance that you will not become critically ill. That is very good news. We're grateful for that. But there's also a lot of sobering news. And we need to understand both sides of this. And this is the part that has confused a lot of people because of the good news that I just said, that a lot of people who get this are not becoming critically ill. A lot of people are tending to blow it off and say, well, it's not that big of a deal. A lot of people who get this aren't even getting that sick with it, so how big of a deal is it? And younger people aren't dying, so how big of a deal is it? As if we didn't love senior adults. I mean, what a strange response. But on the sobering side of this, we're going to have to think about this for a bit. This is a very peculiar virus because it's sort of a feast or famine type situation. That the people who contract this tend to, in large numbers, not get terribly sick, but those who do get critically sick are getting horribly sick and a large percentage are dying, which is a very, very peculiar trend, but that is very much the global trend. In trying to get a handle on what we're looking at, you hear people saying all kinds of things, and one of the most common responses on the side of trying to say it's not that big a deal, we don't need to be worried about it, is either pointing to the raw number of people who have contracted this either nationally or globally or who have died globally. And say, if you look at this, it's such a tiny, tiny fraction of the percentage of the population, and so how serious is that? the thing to understand is this is just beginning. 3.5 months ago, one person had this illness. Today, it's in 155 countries. 160,000 people have been diagnosed with this, and that's probably only a shadow of reality because just so many people haven't been tested. It is important to understand in facing a crisis like this, there are two numbers that matter more than anything else in understanding the nature of a disease. And that is mortality rate and the R-naught factor of a disease. The R-naught factor is a measure of how easily transmittable a disease is. There are a lot of different diseases that will be high in one or the other of those two things. For instance, MERS and SARS had extremely high mortality rates. If you got it, there's a really good chance you were going to die. But thankfully, they were not as easily transmittable, and so they became much more manageable diseases, though they were terrible diseases. The really, really scary thing is when you ever have a disease that is high in both of those numbers. And so let's pause for a moment to consider what we are currently looking at, because so many people are saying, don't worry about this, it's just like the flu. In fact, it's not killing nearly as many people as the flu is killing. So let's get really clear about this. This disease is like the flu so long as you include all flus. And you include specifically the Spanish flu of 1918, because that is what this is most like. None of us were around in 1918 to watch what happened. So let me remind you of what happened in 1918. In 1 year, in a period of history when there was very little international travel, a strain of the flu, which had a 2.5% mortality rate, killed between 20 and 100 million people globally in 1 year's time. Basically, it killed as many people as all of World War II killed globally, and it did it in 1 year at a time when people were not traveling between countries very frequently. That's what a strain of the flu with a 2.5% mortality rate can do. Unfortunately, we're looking at a virus which has a similar mortality rate. Now, you'll hear a bunch of different explanations as to what the current mortality rate is. Those who are trying to diminish how bad it is are saying it may be as low as 1%. It's not going to be 1%. It's not 1%. When you measure mortality rate, the only thing that can give you a real number for mortality rate is by examining closed cases, resolved cases. That means the disease has run its course in a person's life and they either got well or they died. If somebody still has the disease, you don't know what the outcome's going to be, so you can't count them on the mortality rate. For those who have been diagnosed globally with this illness, and for those who've ever been diagnosed with COVID-19 in the last 3.5 months, just over half are closed cases, just above 50%. So of those closed cases, the one that can be measured, we know how many lived and how many died. And the number has stayed steady. 7% of closed cases ended in death. That's a fact. That's not social media. And by the way, social media has become the worst source of information. You know, it's an old saying that in war, the first casualty is always the truth. Well, we're in a war, and the truth is getting run over. What I'm telling you, these are the numbers that the CDC and the World Health Organization and all will stand behind. Of closed cases, 7% have died. Now, that's not going to end up being the mortality rate for this disease. It's going to wind up being more like 2.5% or 3.5%, most likely. It might be just a tick above that. But what we're seeing is a mortality rate very much in line with the Spanish flu. Okay, how contagious is this thing? The flu that we normally see, a typical round of the flu, let's just say in the past year or two in the United States. For the past year, about 1 in 13 Americans, in spite of the fact that we do the flu vaccine, about 1 in 13 Americans got the flu this last cycle. We say, oh, we can live with that. We're not crazy about it, but 1 in 13 got it. And of those who get it, roughly, the numbers are a little fuzzy, but roughly 1 out of 1,500 of the people who get just the normal flu in America die from that. So 1 in 13 catch it, and then out of those, 1 in 1,500 die. Well, the flu has an R-naught factor, that's the measure of how easily transmittable it is, of about 1.2 or 1.3. That means everybody who gets it is going to pass it on to about 1.2 or 1.3 people. Anything above 1 means it's going to grow in number. That's why the flu spreads so badly, because at 1.2 or 1.3, it's easy to pass around. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has an R0 factor of somewhere between 2 and 3.8. That's what causes a pandemic. It's very, very easily transmittable. It is a very hardy virus. It survives on surfaces for a long time, and it's very stealthy. It's very peculiar. It's got a long incubation period between the time that you catch it and the time that it manifests any symptoms. It's longer than most illnesses. So you can be carrying this around for a bunch of days and not know that you have it. And in spite of what we were told early on, where health officials said, don't worry about spreading it, very few people are going to spread it during those days before they feel sick. Now, more than a half dozen international studies of COVID-19 have proven again and again and again that people are widely spreading the disease before they ever knew that they were sick, before they ever had any symptoms. And so it's this confluence of issues, that it's easily transmittable, that it has a high mortality rate, that it's very hardy, and all of that coming together makes this the perfect storm. And I know that it's easy to look at the numbers and go, yeah, but still, there haven't been that many people who've caught it, and there haven't been that many people who have died. How alarmed do we need to be? Forgive me if this sounds like it's overstating the case, but to take that attitude is very similar to being on the Titanic after the iceberg was hit, but in the hours that immediately followed, and saying, you know, we're still above water and the ship's only leaning this much. I mean, how bad can it be? Not many people have died yet. We are so early in this, and we know because this has been so carefully studied, we know how it plays out when you mix this level of communicability of the disease with this level of mortality rate. We're not having to make it up. We've seen this in modern history. It's just been about 100 years. We know how that plays out, but we've never seen how that plays out when people travel this freely. That's why they're locking down travel the way that they are. So we have a serious situation before us, and then the question becomes, how do we respond to that? Well, first of all, as the people of God, we certainly shouldn't respond in panic and in fear, and that's not what we're doing as a church, and you'll see across the board, churches are going to shut down what they're doing. We're doing that because we want to be responsible, and we don't have to every Sunday of the year be gathered like this in order to be the church. This is an opportunity for us to be the church in the community. So my appeal to you is a handful of things. First of all, be of good courage. Be encouraged. God is faithful through this. And above everything, do exactly what Todd just sang. Cry out to Jesus. God is greater than this disease. How we need to respond to this is we need to pray like it's all up to God to stop this, and work like it's all up to us to stop it. That's a good approach, isn't it? God is able, and I fully believe that He will respond to the prayers of His people as nations cry out to Him, and that we'll see the tide turned on this. So first of all, pray. Secondly, do the obvious. Do the practical personal hygiene things that'll ensure your safety, and you don't need me to give you a lesson on what those things are. You're hearing it in every form of media that's out there. But the final thing, and this is the one that people are so resistant to. This is the reason that we're shuttering everything that we do in the church for a season. We must practice this thing that we're referring to as social distancing. There is only one way humanly possible to stem a disease like this, and that is we have to not be around each other. It's going to be terribly inconvenient, but if we don't do this by choice, I can tell you what's coming, and it is right around the corner. If we don't take the steps that we need to take to stay away from each other. When I say stay away from each other, it doesn't just mean that you don't come to church. It means you don't go out to eat. It means you don't go to work. It means you do not do the things where you're going to come in contact with other humans for the next few weeks. If you don't do this, rest assured, the government will step in. We're seeing this happen in multiple democracies where the disease is just a week or two ahead of us, what we're experiencing in America, and the government will have to force us to stop doing these things. It's a really curious experiment that we're in right now. because Americans are so independent. We don't want anybody telling us what we can or can't do. And if you look around, everybody's doing exactly what they've always been doing. And part of it is because right now we have no earthly idea how much this is in our own yard. We don't know. And the reason we don't know is because people haven't been tested. I mean, the numbers came out yesterday that in the United States, less than 8,000 people have been tested by Wednesday of this past week. In the state of Alabama, 70 people had been tested, a grand total of 70 as of Thursday. We're talking 3 days ago. And it takes 24 to 48 hours to get the results. So the numbers that would make you think, oh, it's not here yet, we don't have any idea whether it's here or not. I'm not telling you that it's rampant here. Nobody knows, because in a state with 5 million people, 70 people have been tested as of Thursday. So I don't want you to panic over that. I just want you to understand that for us to go, well, I don't feel sick. I don't feel like there's anything wrong with me, so I'm not going to give it to anybody. You can't think like that. First of all, you're not going to know that you have it and that you can pass it on until you've had it for several days and you've been able to pass it on for several days. And we cannot be so selfish as to say, my age group, I've seen the percentages. I've got a way, way below 1% chance of dying if I get this. Okay, if you're young, that's the case. But how many people are you willing to kill in the name of, it ain't going to hurt me? There's nothing that would be less Christian than for us to be inconsiderate of the people around us who have underlying health conditions and who are elderly. So if for no other reason than for the safety of everyone around us, we've got to do something that's terribly inconvenient. But how inconvenient is it that for just a few weeks, we'd stay at home? So I am appealing to you. Pick up what you need. I hope it isn't toilet paper. Pick up whatever else you need and go home. Don't come back to church. Don't go out to eat. Make whatever arrangements you need to with work, but stay away from everyone. But stay in touch. Stay in touch with your church. Stay in touch with your small group. Stay in touch with your neighbors. Now, do your best to do that online and by phone, but don't closet yourself away. I mean, thankfully, we live in a time where we can stay in touch with people and see what they need, and we can get people what they need without having to get in their faces and without touching them. So don't closet yourself in a way that you isolate yourself in terms of knowing what's going on with other people and being able to show the love of Christ to them and just compassion. Stay in touch, but stay away from one another. Make sense? It's not a happy message, but it is reality. And we can impact what's happening in the world far more than anyone else by our prayers. When people pray in faith, the hand and heart of God are moved.